October 29th, 1929. A day forever etched into American memory as Black Tuesday. The stock market, once the shining symbol of post-World War I prosperity, collapsed.
And the official reaction to the crash of the market is a sense of shock, disbelief, and hubris.
Within hours, approximately $14 billion vanished from the U.S. economy. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted by 12%. Panic gripped Wall Street. Investors tried to dump their stocks, but there were no buyers.
All of a sudden, they realized the model that had been in their mind was totally wrong.
By mid-November, the market lost nearly $30 billion, more than the U.S. government's annual budget at the time. The Dow had lost almost half its value from its high earlier in 1929. Bankers tried to restore order. Men like J.P. Morgan Jr. and other financiers pooled millions to stabilize the market. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The seeds of disaster had been planted long before the crash.
The plight of homelessness, of poverty, of no work becomes a universal plight.
The 1920s were known as the Roaring Twenties, a decade of jazz, flappers, and booming business. But beneath the glamour, the U.S. economy was fragile. Banks operated with minimal regulation, loaning money recklessly. The stock market was driven by speculation, with many buying stocks on margin, borrowing up to 90% of the stock price. Meanwhile, income inequality soared. The top 1% of Americans held more wealth than the bottom 42% combined.
What they would do is hype up a particular stock, buy it up themselves, and then dump it on the market.
Factories produced more goods than people could buy. Farmers were already in crisis after World War I, and debt piled up across rural America. When the market crashed, the whole system came crashing down. By 1933, the economy had hit rock bottom. Unemployment soared to 25%. Approximately 15 million Americans were without work. 9,000 banks failed, wiping out life savings. Homelessness exploded. Families lived in cars, shacks, or sprawling slums known as Hoovervilles, named bitterly after President Herbert Hoover, who many blamed for the crisis.
People, as they lost their homes, had to go somewhere, and they went largely into these makeshift huts that they put together with cardboard and tin and leftover materials. They slept in caves in Central Park.
Men who once worked in factories or offices lined up at soup kitchens. Children quit school to help their families survive. Suicides skyrocketed. In 1932 alone, over 23,000 Americans took their own lives, the highest number ever recorded at that time. Farmers weren't spared. A deadly combination of over-farming and drought turned the Great Plains into a barren wasteland. The Dust Bowl drove hundreds of thousands of families from states like Oklahoma and Texas. They became migrants, labeled Okies, wandering to California in search of work that rarely existed. Amid the crisis, the federal government appeared paralyzed. President Hoover believed in rugged individualism, the idea that Americans should solve their own problems without government aid. But as banks collapsed and breadlines grew, so did public anger. Protest movements spread. In 1932, thousands of World War I veterans, known as the Bonus Army, marched on Washington to demand early payment of their promised bonuses, not scheduled to be paid out until 1945.
Hoover was not unsympathetic to them as human beings. He thought their specific demand was fiscally unsound and irresponsible, and he thought that they should be cleared out of the buildings they were squatting in Washington, D.C.
Hoover ordered the U.S. Army to drive them out. Under General Douglas MacArthur, troops with bayonets and tear gas cleared the veterans' camps, an event that shocked the nation and sealed Hoover's political fate. With faith in the system shattered, crime and corruption spread. Gangsters like Al Capone, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, and Pretty Boy Floyd infamously thrived in the early 1930s, sometimes even celebrated by the public. Desperate people turned to radical ideas. Some flirted with communism, others dreamed of a revolution. In the 1932 election, Americans demanded change, and they got it. Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Democrat and former governor of New York, won in a landslide. He promised a new deal for the American people.
It looks, my friend, like a real landslide this time.
On March 4, 1933, Roosevelt delivered his first inaugural address. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It wasn't just rhetoric. FDR went to work immediately. In his first 100 days, Roosevelt pushed through unprecedented legislation. His goal was threefold: relief, recovery, and reform. The key New Deal included the Emergency Banking Act, which closed failing banks and restored public trust; the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, which employed young men to plant trees, build parks, and fight erosion; the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, created jobs for artists, teachers, and laborers, building roads, schools, and bridges; the Social Security Act of 1935, establishing unemployment insurance and pensions for the elderly; the Securities and Exchange Commission, created to regulate Wall Street to prevent future crashes. Millions found work through these programs. Farmers received price supports, labor unions gained strength, and child labor was restricted. But FDR's New Deal was not without critics. The U.S. public debt increased from $20 billion to $33.7 billion from 1933 to 1936, approximately 40% of the U.S. GDP at the time. Business leaders accused him of socialism. The Supreme Court struck down several of his early laws. Even within his party, Roosevelt faced opposition. Yet he pushed on, winning 4 terms, more than any president before or since. Not everyone benefited from the New Deal. Black Americans often received less aid or were excluded from job programs. Women struggled to find work in male-dominated projects. In the South, racism remained entrenched. New Deal programs like the CCC were often segregated. Labor tensions boiled over. In 1937, a strike at the Republic Steel plant in Chicago turned deadly when police fired on unarmed workers, killing 10 in the Memorial Day massacre. Violence between unions and corporations escalated as the fight for workers' rights intensified. Corruption continued to persist. Some New Deal projects were plagued with waste and political favoritism. But despite these flaws, the New Deal restored hope. By the late 1930s, the Depression had eased, but full recovery remained elusive. Then came a global crisis that would reshape everything: World War II. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, the U.S. remained neutral. But by 1941, America was ramping up arms production, sending supplies to Britain and France through the Lend-Lease Act. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America entered the war, and the economy transformed overnight. Military production exploded in World War II. 300,000 aircraft were manufactured, 102,000 tanks, nearly 12 million rifles. Millions of uniforms were needed. Over 1,200 major combatant ships were all built to support the war efforts. Factories ran 24/7. During World War II, unemployment would drop as low as 1.2%. Women entered the workforce in massive numbers, symbolized by Rosie the Riveter. The war effort united the nation, and with it, the Great Depression came to an end. The Great Depression redefined the role of the federal government in people's lives. It led to the creation of Social Security, banking regulations, and labor protections. It reminded the nation that unchecked greed and inequality can destroy even the strongest economy. Millions suffered. But the resilience of everyday Americans, from factory workers to farmers, mothers to migrants, helped rebuild a broken nation. And thanks to leaders like Franklin D. Roosevelt, the U.S. emerged not just from a depression, but from a decade that almost broke the American dream.